In a story filled with unexpected turns, Valentina Ramirez's life unfolds with both joy and sorrow. Once married in a charming church in Mexico City, Valentina's dreams of a stable future are shattered when her husband Luis abandons her and their two children, Carlos and Miguel. Left to raise her children alone, Valentina faces countless challenges, working tirelessly to provide for them while suppressing her heartache. Despite her sacrifices, her sons grow up to be selfish and ungrateful, eventually making a heart-wrenching decision to sell her house and leave her in a nursing home. Years later, Carlos and Miguel return to visit their ailing mother, now a shadow of her former self. As they confront their past actions, they are forced to reckon with their decisions and the impact they've had on their mother's life. In a moment of unexpected revelation, they discover a potential inheritance linked to Valentina, but it's too late to undo the damage. Witness the emotional journey of Valentina's story, a poignant reminder of how life's surprises can take us from moments of happiness to deep regret. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. In a heart-wrenching turn of events, the children decided to sell their elderly mother's cherished home, divide the proceeds among themselves, and consign her to a nursing home for the remainder of her days. 3 years later, they returned, only to be astounded and deeply affected by what they discovered. Life has a way of presenting us with unforeseen twists and turns that leave us reeling. Valentina Ramirez, once filled with dreams of a blissful and secure future, had married amidst the grandeur of a beautifully adorned church in Mexico City. The promise of love and a shared life seemed boundless. Yet, as fate would have it, Valentina's journey took an unanticipated and poignant turn. The vibrant dreams she harbored about a life of happiness and stability were soon overshadowed by the harsh realities of life's unpredictability. Had someone dared to predict on her wedding day that her beloved husband, the father of her children, would one day abandon her, leaving her to navigate the complexities of raising their sons, Carlos and Miguel, alone, Valentina would have dismissed such a notion as pure fantasy. The idea seemed inconceivable then, as men were often viewed as the steadfast anchors of familial life. However, Luis, Valentina's husband, shattered this expectation. Overwhelmed and disheartened by the burdens of marriage and fatherhood, he chose a different path, abandoning his family in their time of need. On an ordinary afternoon, following a grueling day of work, Valentina was confronted with a devastating reality when she discovered a note from Luis. Initially, she mistook it for a cruel prank, only to find his clothes and belongings were missing. Confronted with this unexpected and harsh truth, Valentina was forced to summon a strength she had never before realized she possessed. In his note, Luis explained that he could not take their children with him, as his new partner had no desire for children other than her own. Consequently, he left Valentina to shoulder the responsibility of caring for 16-year-old Carlos and Miguel, promising financial support that never materialized. Valentina and her children were left to navigate life without him. When the divorce papers arrived, accompanied by Luis's formal renunciation of his parental rights over Carlos and Miguel, Valentina experienced a tumultuous mix of relief and profound despair. Clutching the papers with shaking hands, she grappled with the painful reality of her situation. How could he abandon us like this, she wondered, feeling the weight of his departure. The situation was a crushing blow to the entire family. Carlos, the eldest, strove to maintain a facade of strength. "Mom, we're going to be okay, right?" he inquired, trying to mask his insecurities. Still tender in age, Miguel did not fully grasp the gravity of what had transpired but acutely felt his father's absence. Valentina understood she had to be a pillar of strength for her children. What will become of them if something happens to me? She pondered as she meticulously planned for their future. Determined to provide for Carlos and Miguel, she took on extra work and sought additional sources of income. you deserve the best, she would reassure her children as she enrolled them in various extracurricular activities. I want to give you every opportunity I never had. Valentina found herself thrust into an unimaginable situation, forced to juggle the roles of both mother and father in a desperate attempt to fill the void left by Luis's departure. I can't allow them to go without, Valentina resolved, even as she grappled with the exhausting demands of this dual role. Her own needs and desires were relegated to the background. Friends and family frequently urged her to seek companionship, to find happiness again. Valentina, you deserve to be happy too, they would say with well-meaning concern. But the very thought of introducing a stranger into her children's lives filled her with dread. How can I trust anyone after all this, she wondered, her heart heavy with the fear of jeopardizing her children's well-being. In her solitary reflections, Valentina wrestled with the painful realization that if their biological father could abandon them so callously, how could she ever trust someone new to care for them? She struggled to admit, even to herself, the depth of her suffering. The betrayal by Luis was not only a wound to her family, but a personal agony she wasn't prepared to face. Valentina had loved Luis deeply, and the pain of his betrayal was a blow she wasn't equipped to handle. Unlike many, she had no luxury of time to process her emotions or seek solace. There were too many pressing concerns demanding her attention. So she buried her feelings, suppressing her grief and focusing solely on the future. Each day, each hour, each minute presented new challenges that she faced with relentless determination. Raising 2 children alone proved to be an overwhelming task. The differences between boys and girls felt like they were from different worlds. Valentina endeavored to understand, accept, help, and protect Carlos and Miguel, though success was not always hers. Her relentless concern and desire to make up for their father's absence seemed to backfire, resulting in 2 increasingly selfish children. To them, their mother was little more than a means to their desires, with "I want" becoming their mantra. The delicate balance of give and take was shattered. Valentina poured all of herself into her role as a mother, while Carlos and Miguel took without end, always wanting more. As they entered adolescence, the challenge only grew more intense. The respect for their mother eroded, replaced by a willingness to place all responsibility on her shoulders, amplifying her feelings of guilt. During their arguments, they would often hurl accusations that their father's departure was her fault, a manipulation that cut her deeply. "Did I fail you?" Valentina would ponder in her quieter moments. Maybe I wasn't firm enough, or didn't say the right thing at the right time. Her love for her children was immense, yet she feared causing them further pain. In the end, she resigned herself to the reality of their situation, acknowledging that some things were beyond her control. What grew, she thought, with a sense of resigned acceptance. From an early age, Carlos and Miguel took command of their lives with emotional volatility and scant rationality. Valentina faced numerous challenges with them, yet when consequences loomed, they turned to her for support. With her motherly heart, Valentina could never refuse their help or set firm boundaries, despite their challenging behavior and ingrained selfishness. She always yielded to their demands, driven by her unwavering, nurturing instinct. When Valentina received the harrowing diagnosis that her health was in rapid decline due to a serious illness, it felt as though the earth beneath her feet had given way. But the shockwaves that rippled through her 2 sons, Carlos and Miguel, were not born out of fear for their mother's well-being. Instead, the harsh reality that now loomed over them was one of unexpected and unwelcome responsibility. They were suddenly thrust into a situation that demanded maturity, compassion, and selflessness, qualities neither brother had cultivated. The naivety that had shielded them from the brutal truths of life was torn away, exposing their deep-seated inadequacies. The gravity of their mother's situation forced them to confront truths they were not prepared to face, truths that stripped them of any illusions they had about themselves or their roles in the family. Behind closed doors, away from Valentina's trusting gaze, the brothers whispered their plans, concocting a strategy that was more about self-preservation than filial duty. They were driven not by love or a sense of moral obligation, but by a cold, calculating desire to secure their futures. Their actions were not guided by any principles of compassion or responsibility. Instead, they convinced themselves that they were justified in their decisions, cloaking their selfish motives in the thin veil of practicality. Recklessness became their ally as they rationalized their intentions, dismissing any thoughts of the emotional or ethical implications of what they were about to do. Their first move was to paint a facade of concern, cloaking their true intentions in a layer of feigned affection. They lavished Valentina with honeyed words, filling the air with insincere reassurances. The affection they displayed was as shallow as it was sweet, meant only to keep up appearances and conceal the coldness of their true motives. They pressed her relentlessly, convincing her that it was in her best interest to sign over all her assets to them. The pretext was noble enough. They claimed it was all to ensure her care and comfort in the difficult days ahead. But the persistence with which they pursued this goal was telling, revealing a hunger not for her well-being, but for the wealth she had amassed over a lifetime of hard work. Valentina, already weakened and vulnerable, found herself overwhelmed by their insistence. Her illness had sapped her strength, both physical and emotional, leaving her defenses lowered. After much hesitation and inner turmoil, she finally gave in to their demands, signing away everything she had worked so tirelessly to earn. But the moment the papers were signed, a chilling realization began to dawn on her. As she watched her sons leave the registry office with barely concealed satisfaction, she knew with a sinking heart that she had been betrayed. The plan, so carefully hidden behind smiles and empty promises, was now laid bare before her. Her beloved sons, in whom she had placed all her trust and love, had executed a plan that would leave her destitute. Once the legalities were settled, Carlos and Miguel wasted no time. The house that had been her sanctuary, the money she had saved penny by penny, even the old car she had used for years, all were quickly claimed by the brothers. They divided her belongings with the cold efficiency of men who felt no obligation to the person who had sacrificed so much for them. "Why should we bear the cost of her care when she's already given so much to the state?" Carlos questioned, his voice void of any hint of guilt or shame. His brother Miguel, equally devoid of compassion, agreed wholeheartedly. "She ruined her health working that damn job, so why shouldn't the government be responsible now?" As the days passed, Valentina found herself increasingly isolated, both physically and emotionally. In the rare moments of solitude that her condition allowed, she reflected on the situation with a heart heavy with sorrow. "How did I fail to see this coming?" she asked herself, tears welling up in her eyes. The betrayal was not just in the actions of her sons, but in the realization that she had been blind to their true natures. She had only ever wanted the best for them, and had devoted her life to ensuring their happiness and success. But in the end, that devotion had been met with indifference, and worse, with exploitation. Carlos and Miguel had convinced themselves that the state, cold, impersonal, and distant, was now responsible for their mother's care, not them. She worked all her life, paid her taxes, so now it's the government's turn, Carlos remarked one day, as if the logic was irrefutable. For years, Valentina had been their steadfast protector, the one who shouldered every burden so they wouldn't have to. She had provided for them, nurtured them, and supported them through every trial. But now, in her time of need, they had abandoned her, leaving her to the mercy of a system that would never love or care for her the way she had loved and cared for them. They found comfort in blaming her for her misfortune, shifting the weight of their guilt onto her frail shoulders. They refused to acknowledge their moral failings, preferring instead to hide behind twisted justifications. It was easier, after all, to cast blame on their mother and the government than to face the painful truth of their betrayal. The sale of Valentina's assets was swift and efficient. The house that had once been filled with warmth and laughter was sold off to the highest bidder, its new owners oblivious to the memories it held. The money from the sale, along with the rest of her meager possessions, was split between the brothers without a second thought. They treated the transaction like any other, devoid of any emotional connection to the items that had once been the cornerstone of their family's life. And with the money safely in their pockets, they turned their attention to the next step in their plan. Without a trace of remorse, they arranged for Valentina to be placed in a nursing home, one that catered to the elderly with special health needs. The decision was made quickly, without consultation or consideration of her wishes. To them, it was the simplest solution, the most efficient way to rid themselves of the burden she had become. The home was cold and impersonal, a place where the sick and dying were sent to fade away, out of sight and out of mind. It was here that Valentina was to spend her final days, surrounded not by the love and care of her family, but by strangers who could never replace the warmth of her son's embrace. As she lay in her sterile room, listening to the distant sounds of life continuing without her, she couldn't help but wonder where she had gone wrong. How had she raised two sons who could so easily turn their backs on her? The pain of their betrayal cut deeper than any illness, leaving wounds that would never heal. Valentina's heart shattered when the full weight of her situation hit her. The once strong and independent woman now found herself abandoned, discarded like an unwanted object, and left to wither away in the cold, sterile environment of an institution. The shock was overwhelming, plunging her into a deep despair that gnawed at her soul. The horror of what her life had become was almost too much to bear. She felt the crushing weight of her powerlessness, the sting of her uselessness, especially when she watched her children, her flesh and blood, turn their backs on her. "Mom, it's for your good," Carlos muttered, his eyes darting away from hers, unable to face the pain he was inflicting. "Here you'll receive the care you need," Miguel added, his words hollow and rushed, more eager to escape than to console. Left in that institution, Valentina's mind became a prison of tormenting thoughts. The quiet of the nights offered no peace, only endless hours of reflection and self-recrimination. She couldn't help but question her role in the tragedy that had befallen her. Was it my fault? Did I fail as a mother? Was I too lenient, too absent? These questions haunted her, circling her mind in a never-ending loop. She sifted through the memories of her life, searching for the moment when everything had gone wrong, but no answers came. Instead, she was left with a sickening sense of betrayal that pierced her deeply, leaving her raw and wounded. The realization that her children had discarded her like a burden they were desperate to be rid of was almost too much to comprehend. Carlos and Miguel, on the other hand, seemed entirely unburdened by any moral or ethical considerations. They had convinced themselves that they were justified in their actions, and their hearts hardened against any pangs of guilt. Why should we sacrifice our future and the best years of our lives for someone who won't even get better? Carlos rationalized to Miguel, his tone devoid of empathy or sorrow. Exactly. We need to think about ourselves now, Miguel agreed, his voice cold, devoid of any trace of the love they once might have felt for their mother. Over time, Valentina became little more than a distant, fading memory, her existence slipping into the background of their lives. The absence of their father had been a part of Carlos and Miguel's lives for years, but now, with Valentina effectively out of the picture, they felt as if they had no parents at all. The connection to the woman who had given them life and nurtured them was severed, and neither brother seemed to feel the loss. There were no anxious thoughts about her health, no concern for how she was coping, and no curiosity about her state of mind. They simply didn't care. Their lives continued, filled with the busyness of daily existence, untroubled by the woman they had left behind. Occasionally, they might have felt a fleeting pang of nostalgia for the days when their mother was there to solve their problems and guide them, but these thoughts were shallow and quickly dismissed. 3 long years passed since that dreadful diagnosis had upended Valentina's life. During this time, she languished in that cold, impersonal nursing home, surrounded by strangers instead of the family she had once cherished. The vibrant, loving home she had once known was replaced by the sterile walls of a facility where she was just another patient, another responsibility for the overworked staff. The life she had built, the home she had lovingly maintained, was gone, sold off by her sons who had taken everything from her, leaving her with nothing. And in all that time, not once did Carlos or Miguel visit. Not a single phone call, not a single word of comfort or inquiry into her well-being. They were too busy, too wrapped up in their own lives to spare even a moment for the woman who had sacrificed so much for them. Valentina eventually stopped hoping for a call or a visit. She understood the harsh reality of her situation. She had been abandoned by the very people she had loved most in the world. The pain of that realization was a heavy burden, but it was one she had come to accept. When the doors of the institution closed behind her, it wasn't just the end of her independence, it was the end of her belief in the love and loyalty of her children. She knew, in the deepest parts of her soul, that she was truly alone. The betrayal was complete, and the sorrow that accompanied it became her constant companion in those final, lonely days. One day, the nursing home manager approached Valentina with unexpected news her children were coming for a visit. A whirlwind of confusion and hesitant anticipation swept through her. Why, after all this time, would Carlos and Miguel choose now to come? Her frail frame and the sterile surroundings of the facility seemed worlds apart from the vibrant life she once knew, making their visit a jarring intrusion into her somber routine. When Carlos and Miguel finally appeared, they were dressed in impeccably tailored suits, their polished exteriors a stark contrast to the bleak reality of Valentina's world. It was as if they had stepped out of a different realm, one far removed from the harshness of the past months. The nursing home manager escorted them through the hallways, and Carlos and Miguel's glances were laced with a certain coldness, a subtle disdain that spoke volumes. They were unsettled by the grim environment, but their discomfort was not accompanied by any visible sign of remorse or compassion. As the manager led them to Valentina's room, Carlos and Miguel's eyes flickered with a mix of surprise and something that could have been mistaken for guilt. The woman they saw before them was a far cry from the vibrant mother they had once known. Valentina, once full of life and strength, was now a mere shadow of her former self. Her health had deteriorated so significantly that it was painfully clear to anyone who had known her in better times. Carlos, trying to mask his unease, spoke first. His voice wavered, betraying the facade of confidence he had maintained. "Mom," he began, his tone carrying a tremor of vulnerability, "we've come to see how you're doing. It's been a long time." Valentina, though visibly weak and weary, managed to offer a faint, bittersweet smile. Her eyes, though dimmed by illness, still held a glimmer of the resilience she had once been known for. "I see you haven't forgotten me entirely," she responded softly, attempting to summon whatever strength she had left. Her words, though gentle, were laced with an undertone of pain and disillusionment. Miguel, his face a mask of strained politeness, turned to his brother before speaking. "We know we've been absent," he began, his voice lacking its usual conviction. "But we wanted to come and see how you're holding up. How are you feeling?" Valentina's gaze, filled with a poignant mixture of sadness and resignation, met their eyes. "I'm managing," she replied quietly, her voice a whisper against the cold, impersonal backdrop of the nursing home. "It's been hard, but I'm still here." The silence that followed was heavy, almost tangible. Carlos and Miguel exchanged uneasy glances, the gravity of their mother's condition sinking in as they faced the stark reality of the woman they had left behind. Yet, despite their presence, the emotional chasm between them seemed insurmountable. Their visit, though intended as a gesture of concern, felt hollow and inadequate in the face of the profound loss and betrayal that had defined Valentina's recent years. The visit turned out to be fleeting, a mere formality rather than a meaningful gesture. Carlos and Miguel, their discomfort palpable, struggled to navigate the fragile situation. Their departure was marked by a hurried formality, their words sparse and insincere. Valentina watched them leave, the heavy silence of the room filling with an overwhelming sense of finality. The brief encounter had done little to bridge the emotional chasm that had grown between them, nor could it alter the painful reality of the past or mend the deep wounds left by their actions. As Carlos and Miguel walked away, their faces set in grim contemplation, an unsettling feeling lingered. The visit had stirred something within them, a flicker of unease and perhaps regret, though too late to amend their previous decisions. They returned to their lives, burdened by the knowledge that their mother's remaining days had been spent in a cold, impersonal facility, far from the love and warmth they had once taken for granted. In the days that followed, the gravity of their encounter weighed heavily on their minds. Miguel, still grappling with the disquieting revelation, spoke up with a blend of astonishment and skepticism. Mother could be the heir to a great fortune, he said, the notion lingering in the air like an unsettling whisper. Carlos, still processing the shock, pondered the swift actions of the notary, suspecting a financial motivation behind the interest in finding the heir. We need to investigate this thoroughly, Miguel Carlos said, his mind already racing with possibilities. If this is true, it changes everything. The brothers agreed to meet the following day to discuss their findings and strategize their next steps. The notion of potential inheritance sparked a glimmer of hope and renewed urgency in their hearts. They convened at a local cafe, a familiar haunt from their teenage years, where the comforting hum of the surroundings contrasted sharply with the tension that now gripped them. Seated at a secluded table, they began to delve into the implications of their newfound information. The cafe, once a backdrop for casual conversations and youthful dreams, now became a stage for their covert planning. Carlos and Miguel, though reluctant to confront their guilt, knew they needed to act. They debated their options with a mix of apprehension and determination, each grappling with the moral complexities of their situation. Neither of them wanted to admit it, but beneath the surface of their strategizing lay a deep-seated concern. They were both haunted by the thought of how differently they might have treated their mother if they had known about the inheritance from the start. The realization that they had prioritized their convenience over their mother's well-being gnawed at their consciences. As they discussed their plans, a sense of urgency and unease permeated their conversation. They were driven by the need to rectify their past mistakes, however challenging that might be. The brothers' meeting was a blend of strategic planning and introspective reflection. The gravity of their actions and the possible repercussions of their newfound knowledge weighed heavily on them. As they mapped out their next moves, both Carlos and Miguel were left to confront the uncomfortable reality of their past decisions and the ethical dilemmas that lay ahead. The silence between Carlos and Miguel was thick with the weight of unspoken regrets. Finally, Miguel broke it, his voice laced with apprehension. "Carlos, do you think Mom would ever forgive us for everything that's happened?" His question hung in the air, a stark reminder of the emotional gulf they faced. Carlos sighed deeply, his gaze fixed on the floor, as if seeking answers from the cold tiles. "No," Miguel, he said, his tone somber. "Mom was always loving and forgiving. Yes, but she was also just and honest. It's painful to admit, but we've constructed a fortress of excuses around our actions to shield ourselves from the truth." Miguel looked distant, his eyes clouded with regret and confusion. "I feel bad," sure, he confessed, his voice heavy with the burden of his conscience. "But what's the point of dwelling on it now? Why are we only starting to worry about Mom after 3 years of living with the decision to send her away?" Carlos's expression hardened, his frustration palpable. "It's one thing to convince yourself internally that you did the right thing," he said sharply. It's another to confront Mom's reproachful gaze and hear her accusations echoing in your mind. It's the reality of facing her pain that's crushing. Miguel, trying to maintain his composure, offered a defensive counterpoint. If Mom wanted to accuse us, she would have reached out when she realized we abandoned her, he argued, his tone defensive but tinged with a hint of defensiveness. Carlos's frustration mounted. "Miguel, how can you be so detached? You weren't the only one responsible here," he said, his voice rising. "You accepted your share of the money just as much as I did. We both contributed to this mess." Miguel, though acknowledging the lack of nobility in his actions, still wrestled with his conscience. "I admit my actions weren't honorable," he said, his voice subdued. "But I don't feel completely guilty. It's complicated." Carlos, seeking a resolution, turned to his brother with a sense of urgency. "So what now, Miguel? Are we just going to continue?" As if nothing happened, his eyes searched for answers in his brother's face. Miguel remained silent for a moment, contemplating the gravity of their situation. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying a note of reluctant determination. "We need to find out more about this inheritance," he said slowly. "Maybe it will give us a chance to make things right." The brothers began discussing their approach to dealing with their mother's evaluation of their behavior. "If we apologize and she doesn't understand or forgive us, at least we'll know we tried," Carlos suggested, attempting to grasp at a sliver of hope amidst the bleakness of their situation. Miguel, though still anxious about how Valentina would react, agreed to face the situation head-on. "We owe it to her to at least try," he conceded, the decision settling heavily on both their shoulders. The next day, with a mix of apprehension and resolve, Carlos and Miguel prepared for their visit to Valentina. They bought several gifts, understanding the importance of not arriving empty-handed after their prolonged absence. The anticipation of the visit was fraught with uncertainty, as they imagined various scenarios in their minds, but they knew that Valentina's reaction could be unpredictable. Upon arriving at the nursing home, they were guided by a nurse to Valentina's room. She was calmly reading a book, her demeanor serene and composed. As they entered, Valentina closed the book and looked up at them. Her expression was inscrutable, a veil of unreadable emotion covering her face. The moment was heavy with tension, each brother grappling with the realization that their actions had led them to this fraught encounter. Valentina, with a calmness that surprised Carlos and Miguel, set her book aside and requested, "Wait a moment, please. I'll finish this chapter." The brothers, taken aback by her serene demeanor, complied and waited in silence. When Valentina finally approached them, her gaze was steady, and she inquired, "What brings you here after all this time?" Carlos hesitated, his unease palpable, but Miguel stepped in to respond. "Mom, it wasn't an easy decision for us to come. We've been worried about you." Valentina's cold expression did not waver as she probed further. "And why did you disappear for so long?" The conversation, though strained, began to take on a more natural flow as Carlos attempted to broach the subject of the inheritance through indirect queries, but his efforts were in vain. Miguel spoke about life's unpredictability, but Valentina listened with a detached demeanor, offering only occasional nods of acknowledgement. When Valentina stepped away briefly, Carlos seized the moment to chastise Miguel for his bluntness. "We need to be more cautious, brother," he advised, frustration evident in his voice. Upon Valentina's return, the dialogue resumed with a more guarded approach. The brothers avoided any further insinuations and watched a television show in the nursing home's common room. Seizing an opening, Miguel inquired about their brother Sergio. Carlos shot Miguel a disapproving look, his irritation barely concealed. Valentina responded that she had not been in contact with Sergio for quite some time. Miguel, regretting his impulsiveness, still failed to take full responsibility for his actions. It became evident that Valentina was resolutely guarding her secrets, her rigid demeanor a testament to her disdain for dishonesty. The brothers spent a bit more time conversing with Valentina before taking their leave. She made a sardonic remark as they said their goodbyes, a comment they chose to dismiss as mere irony. As soon as they were outside, Carlos confronted Miguel, his frustration evident. "We need to be more subtle if we want to uncover anything," he said sharply. Miguel, trying to justify his approach, explained that breaking down the wall of distrust between them and their mother was essential to regaining her trust. Carlos agreed but was uncertain about how to proceed. The next day, Carlos waited anxiously for Miguel's call, hoping for some clarity. When they finally met, Carlos shared his reflections from the night before. "It's not easy, Miguel. We need to find a way to reconcile with her," he said, his voice tinged with concern. Miguel, somewhat defensive, replied, "I'm not a monster, Carlos. I'm trying to understand this situation too." The brothers discussed their approach to addressing the issue of inheritance with their mother. Carlos, thoughtful and introspective, suggested, "I think we need to be honest and admit our mistakes." Miguel, however, was hesitant to disclose their knowledge of the inheritance. "I don't know, Carlos. That could put us in a vulnerable position," he said, weighing the potential risks. They agreed on the necessity of overcoming Valentina's distrust by any means necessary. Carlos proposed, "What if we ask Mom directly what she wants and admit that we were wrong?" Miguel disagreed with this direct approach, pondering aloud, "Maybe we should show our genuine remorse without directly mentioning the inheritance." Carlos remained firm in his belief that honesty was crucial to regaining Valentina's trust. "If we're sincere, maybe she'll see that we've changed," he argued. They contemplated the possibility that Valentina might request to return home and reclaim her apartment. "That would be a real test of our sincerity," Carlos reflected, considering the implications of such a move. Miguel, lost in thought, voiced his concern about the financial implications of purchasing a new apartment for their mother. "It's going to cost a lot," he said bluntly, his practicality evident. Carlos, however, was resolute, viewing it as an essential investment in repairing their fractured relationship. "The benefits of rebuilding our relationship with Mom far outweigh any cost," he countered, trying to persuade Miguel of the necessity of this expenditure. After a lengthy discussion, Miguel, albeit reluctantly, agreed to Carlos's plan. Carlos felt a rare sense of satisfaction in having convinced his younger brother, a moment of rare triumph in their relationship. The brothers agreed to visit Valentina again in 3 days, to apologize and propose a reconciliation. On their second visit, Valentina appeared slightly more receptive, though her demeanor remained guarded. The brothers approached the conversation with caution, steering clear of direct references to the inheritance. They focused on rebuilding the emotional connection and repairing the rift that had grown between them. After their visit, Carlos and Miguel sat on a bench in the park, reflecting on the encounter with their mother. Carlos voiced his anxieties, his voice tinged with worry. "Miguel, what if everything goes wrong and Mom doesn't accept our apologies?" He feared that their efforts might not be enough to mend the damage done. Miguel, striving to offer reassurance, replied, "Carlos, we're in this together. If things don't go as planned, we'll both be affected. But we need to move forward with the plan. It's the only way." Carlos, despite his lingering doubts, acknowledged the gravity of the situation. "All right, Miguel, let's buy the apartment for her. It's a risk, but it might be necessary." His decision reflected a commitment to making amends, despite the uncertainties. During their next conversation with Valentina, Carlos decided it was time to address her illness, a topic previously avoided. "Mom, how are you feeling? We didn't discuss that last time," he asked, his concern genuine. Valentina responded candidly about her stable condition, though the emotional distance remained. Miguel then took the opportunity to address their past mistakes. "Mom, we know we were wrong. We're afraid of losing you, just as we lost Dad when we were kids." His apology was heartfelt, aiming to bridge the gap between them. Valentina, listening intently, expressed that to restore their relationship, she wished to return to her home. Carlos quickly agreed to this condition, and the conversation shifted away from any further discussion about the inheritance. The brothers, having secured a commitment to mend their relationship, continued their discussion on the park bench. "Miguel, we have to accept Mom's conditions," Carlos said, a note of determination in his voice. "Let's split the cost of buying a new apartment for her." Miguel, resolute, agreed. "We're in this together, brother. Any failure will affect us equally. We have to move forward with this." His conviction reinforced their commitment to making things right, despite the challenges ahead. Carlos, despite his lingering doubts, understood the gravity of the situation and agreed to take the financial risk of purchasing the apartment. "All right, Miguel, let's do it for Mom," he said, his determination solidifying. During their conversation, Valentina inquired about the ownership of the apartment they were planning to buy for her. Carlos attempted to provide an answer, but Valentina insisted that it had to be in her name. "The apartment needs to be in my name. It's a matter of security for me," she stated firmly. The brothers, recognizing the fairness of her request, agreed without protest. Valentina's demands didn't end there. She also insisted on having the money from the sale of her car and garage returned to her. "You sold my car and garage. I want the money back," she declared with a sense of entitlement. Carlos and Miguel, although reluctant and frustrated, conceded to her demands. They understood that fulfilling these conditions was crucial to regaining her trust and potentially accessing the inheritance they were now so desperate to obtain. "All right, Mom, we'll do it," Miguel said, his voice tinged with resignation. Valentina was thorough and exact in her search for a new apartment, rejecting several options and insisting on high-quality finishes. "I want something comfortable, like what I had before," she explained, emphasizing her desire for a living space that mirrored her previous standards. The brothers found the process of locating and renovating an apartment both exhausting and costly. On top of this, Valentina demanded a refund of 1 million pesos, claiming this was the amount she had lost with the sale of her car and garage. "That's a lot of money," Mom, Carlos remarked, taken aback by the substantial sum. Following yet another grueling meeting with Valentina, Carlos and Miguel sought solace in each other's company. "She's being very cunning," Carlos. "First the apartment, now the money," Miguel observed, his worry palpable. Carlos agreed, noting, "It seems like she's trying to recover everything she's lost." They both recognized that Valentina was using the situation to reclaim her losses and take advantage of their desperation. "We'll have to do it, Miguel. It's the only way to regain Mom's trust and access the inheritance," Carlos concluded, his resolve unwavering. The next day, Carlos reached out to Miguel, who was also dealing with the fallout from Valentina's latest demands. "She's testing us, Miguel. We're going through a real hell," Carlos said, relieved to have someone to share the burden with. The brothers decided to buy Valentina a modest gift, acknowledging that they had already spent a significant amount on fulfilling her demands. "Let's bring something simple but meaningful," Miguel suggested, aiming to balance their financial strain with a gesture of goodwill. As they continued to navigate the complex situation with their mother, Carlos and Miguel faced the daunting challenge of managing their own emotional and financial limits while trying to mend their fractured relationship and secure the inheritance that had become a driving force in their lives. On the day of the celebration of Valentina's new apartment, Carlos and Miguel arrived with a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation, hoping that this occasion would finally lead to the long-awaited revelation of the inheritance. They brought an array of gifts and snacks for tea, eager to create a positive atmosphere. Valentina seemed to be in high spirits, which the brothers took as a promising sign. As they gathered around the table, Valentina began to recount stories about her relatives, including her brother Sergio. Carlos and Miguel, however, were preoccupied with their thoughts, their minds racing with the potential news about the inheritance. When Valentina mentioned Sergio's name, Carlos tensed but quickly composed himself, trying to conceal his reaction. "Do you remember Uncle Sergio who went to the United States?" Valentina asked, her tone casual. Carlos and Miguel nodded, signaling their recollection. "Yes, Mom, you've mentioned him a few times," Carlos replied, trying to maintain his composure. Valentina continued, "Sergio had a difficult life as an immigrant, but his fortune changed when he married a wealthy older woman. When she passed away, she left him all her wealth." The brothers exchanged surprised glances, intrigued by the unexpected turn in the story. "So Uncle Sergio became rich?" Miguel inquired, his curiosity piqued. Valentina nodded but then delivered a shocking twist. "But unfortunately, Sergio lost everything. He made poor investments and squandered his entire fortune. In the end, he died alone and in poverty, leaving no inheritance at all." Carlos and Miguel were stunned into silence. "Mom, is it true that Uncle Sergio lost everything?" Carlos asked, his disbelief evident. Valentina confirmed with a wry smile, "Yes, it's true. And you know what? The whole inheritance story was an act." Miguel, now completely bewildered, asked, "An act? What do you mean, Mom?" Valentina explained, her voice steady but tinged with hurt. It was all a test. The notary's assistant was a nurse from the hospital. "I wanted to see if you still cared about me as a mother, not just for the inheritance." The brothers were left speechless, their minds grappling with the realization that they had been manipulated by their greed and neglect. Valentina, with a piercing gaze and a heavy heart, addressed her sons, "I'm deeply disappointed that you so easily fell for the inheritance story. It shows how far you've drifted from the values of family and love." Carlos and Miguel sat in stunned silence, their feelings of guilt and regret overwhelming them. They understood now that their actions had been driven by selfish motives, and Valentina's test had exposed the depth of their estrangement. The day, which they had hoped would be filled with new beginnings, ended in a sobering confrontation with their failings. Valentina's revelation forced them to confront the reality of their choices and the painful truth that their relationship with their mother had been deeply compromised. As they left the apartment, the weight of their actions settled heavily on their shoulders, leaving them to ponder the true cost of their greed and the fractured family bonds that lay before them. "And I've already written my will," Valentina declared, her words cutting through the air like a sharp knife. The revelation struck Carlos and Miguel like a thunderbolt, leaving them reeling from the weight of its implications. The gravity of being excluded from the will left them feeling utterly devastated. Miguel, overwhelmed by the emotional blow, abruptly stood up from the table, his face pale and his hands trembling. Without a word, he turned and walked towards the door, leaving Carlos and Valentina in stunned silence. Carlos made a desperate attempt to stop him, but Miguel's voice, barely above a whisper, carried a finality that pierced through the tension. "There's nothing more to do here, Carlos." For the first time, Carlos didn't resist. He followed his brother out of the apartment, the heavy realization settling in that Miguel was right. The brothers walked side by side through the streets, the silence between them thick and suffocating. Each man was lost in his thoughts, the magnitude of their actions weighing heavily on their mind. Back in the apartment, Valentina watched her sons leave with a mixture of emotions. She looked around her newly acquired space, feeling a slight smile of satisfaction. The apartment represented more than just a new home. It symbolized her resolve and the lesson she had imparted. A mother's love, she mused, sometimes needs to be tough to drive home important truths. The relief of having taken a stand was tinged with sadness, but Valentina felt she had done what was necessary to teach her sons a valuable lesson. As Carlos and Miguel continued their walk, the silence between them was palpable, a stark contrast to the earlier pretense of normalcy. "Miguel, what are we going to do now?" Carlos finally broke the silence, his voice laced with uncertainty and regret. Miguel stopped and turned to face his brother, his expression resolute. "We have to start fixing things, brother. We need to show Mom that we've learned the lesson," he said, determination clear in his voice. The words were more than just a plan, they were a commitment to change, a promise to make amends not just for the inheritance, but for their moral failings. The two brothers, now acutely aware of their mistakes, knew they had a long and challenging road ahead. Rebuilding their mother's trust and love would require more than just gestures. It demanded genuine remorse and transformation. They were committed to proving their sincerity and reconnecting with Valentina, driven by a newfound understanding of what truly mattered. The journey home was marked by introspection. Carlos and Miguel began to talk openly for the first time in years about their lives, their regrets, and their true values. The conversation was a mixture of vulnerability and resolve, signaling the beginning of a long overdue reconciliation, not just with their mother, but with themselves. In their relentless chase for wealth and success, Carlos and Miguel had lost touch with the core values that truly mattered: family, love, and honesty. Upon returning home, the brothers took a moment to reflect on their actions and devise a plan to demonstrate their genuine repentance and love for Valentina. They decided to take small yet meaningful steps to make amends. This involved regularly visiting their mother and offering their help with anything she needed, all without expecting anything in return. As the weeks passed, Valentina began to notice the sincerity behind their efforts. Though initially skeptical, she gradually opened her heart to the possibility that her sons had indeed learned from their mistakes. Sunday lunches soon became a cherished tradition, filled with laughter and heartfelt conversations. Through their consistent actions and dedication, Carlos and Miguel managed to mend the broken bridge between them and their mother. Valentina, touched by the authentic transformation in her sons, eventually revealed that she would have been another test, a final measure to ensure their change was genuine. One sunny afternoon, while sharing a meal in her new apartment, she handed them copies of her updated will, which included them once more. "I don't need a will to know that I now have my son back," Valentina said, her eyes brimming with tears. Overwhelmed by emotion, Carlos and Miguel embraced their mother tightly, vowing to be the sons she had always deserved. In that poignant moment, they realized that the true inheritance Valentina had gifted them was the enduring power of unconditional love and the invaluable life lessons they had learned. Thank you for joining us on this journey of family, redemption, and invaluable life lessons. As we've seen, Carlos and Miguel's story teaches us that the pursuit of wealth can sometimes overshadow what truly matters: our relationships, honesty, and the unconditional love of family. Through their trials, we've learned about the importance of genuine repentance, the power of consistent actions, and the profound value of rebuilding trust. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What's one key takeaway from this story that resonates with you, and how do you plan to apply it in your own life? Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. If you like this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue to bring you more inspiring stories and content. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.